how do you measure effective remote collaboration? And the tee up here is everyone is remote now. People who didn't know they were remote are remote. There are very few companies where everyone is in the same floor of the same office. Before I was at Miro, I was in Salesforce. You think, hey, you've got a couple of thousand people in the same building, but you're on all different levels. And you would have remote conference calls with those people. You're using the same tooling to connect with those people as if they're in another city or if they're working from home. So remote is really kind of everywhere now. Here we go. Remote is everywhere now. And my big insight here is that it hasn't made it easier. Like the shift towards digital tooling and more work from home, more outsourcing, more companies expanding at a global rate and kind of thinking global first hasn't made collaborating easy. For decades, management theory has been focused on the question of how do you make teams collaborative? How can you make a company collaborative? And those questions are still real. They're still like the big question. How do you make a team truly collaborative? And what we've done with remote is we've made it harder, right? We've not only said, how do you make a team collaborative, but how do you make a team collaborative in a distributed setting? So how do you make a team that's all across the US or all across the world, or even all across multiple levels of a building? How do you make that collaborative? And that's made the problem a lot harder. Now, it's actually added, the old problems are harder than the new problems. And what I mean by that is the new problems of collaboration are kind of hygiene factors. By hygiene factors, I mean like basic factors that impact motivation and connection. So the new factors are, how can I meet people face to face? How can we have a conversation even though you're in Moscow and I'm in San Francisco, right? That's a hygiene factor. How can I know what everyone's working on? What's the system of record? And we have like wikis. So like Zoom has been great. Conferencing's been great for allowing us to see each other face to face. Wikis are great for allowing us to have like a common source of truth. That's really handy. But we already had all that in a regular office 60 years ago, right? How can I meet people face to face? You go and you tap them on the shoulder in their personal office, because everyone used to have their own offices, and you have a face-to-face meeting. How can you know what people are working on? There was a typing pool of typists who were making copies and issuing those copies to everyone in their desks. So those old problems were already solved. And a lot of collaboration now is just catching up with it to solve these new problems, to solve the new easy problems. So how can I meet people? How do I know what people are working on? Even getting together with standardized workflows. Like, why is Scrum methodologies, why is method so important to work in an iterative sense in a distributed organization? Because it's really hard to guide workflows when you're distributed. If you're in one room, you just get people together and you draw on the whiteboard what the process is going to be, and then people are aligned in that workflow. So my first point here is the new problems of collaboration are hygiene factors, and they're somewhat easy to solve with new technology. If it's Zoom, if that technology is a wiki or Confluence pages, or if it's a Scrum or Agile methodology, they're all modern solutions to the new easy problems. But the old problems still remain. That actually, how do you make collaboration? And so this is really about these are motivational problems, right? How do you motivate? In two-factor theory, they're called motivational factors. So these hygiene, simple factors that if Zoom doesn't work, people are pissed and they're demotivated. If Zoom does work, do you get value? Well, you need these motivation factors. And the idea there is they've been around for a long time. So not only is it about getting teams to act together, but how do you actually get them to collaborate? And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that collaboration looks like once I can deal with my own screen here. Okay, so the hygiene factors are really about enabling people to divide up tasks and perform them in parallel, right? So you can have a team of people, hey, if you've got common Confluence pages, you can have a meeting where you divide up the tasks and you work on them and then you report out. You've got a Jira ticketing system maybe. You can do status updates, but you're working independently. I call this co-acting. It's not really collaboration. It's coordinating your activity. So you're coordinated your action, but you're not really working together. There's not a lot of synchronous generation of actually creating new solutions together, that 1 + 1 = 3 piece. And there's not a lot of group learning going on, which is the second piece. Shifting to collaboration, which is, I think, the second phase, what you see is people actually building stuff together, scoping problems together, giving real feedback together, building on each other's ideas. You see vulnerability, right? So you see people going into retros and really opening up about what's not working about the work and what's not working about how the work is taking place. You see active help seeking. So you see people reaching out and saying, hey, I don't have the skills to do this part. Could you advise me? Could you coach me? Could you help me walk me through this piece? I'm overloaded now. Could somebody take this piece away from me? Could someone work with me to make this easier? So people being vulnerable with each other and actively seeking help when they're confused or probing for further knowledge. And you see the group generating learning about how they work over time. So this is the collaboration, and these challenges have been in management theory for like decades and decades. And there's still the same old problems of how do you make teams and organizations work and learn effectively? And there's not a lot of tooling on this. I think if you look at the breakthrough remote companies, they're generally enabling co-acting. They're generally enabling, hey, can we make it like an office was at least in 1950? And great, we can do that now. We used to not be able to do that. If you were 12 hours in a time zone, you were just out of the conversation. It was impossible to have it. Now we can do that. But once we have that, how do we build collaboration? And I think that's a really interesting and challenging problem. I think Miro has something to say with both of these things, but some of my favorite parts of Miro is how it enables synchronous real-time collaboration. When you're on a board, like now you can see Melissa is mapping out some of the concepts I'm sharing, but I could be in there mapping out those concepts with her together. We could all go into this board and we could vote afterwards on which of these notes was most exciting, which ones are going to take forward. We can map out next actions. We could collectively use a template and do some planning together. We could have a retro, and through using these common symbols, we could reflect more deeply on our process and the improvements we want to have. So that's the big shift I want kind of people to take away, is the difference between co-acting and collaborating. And the difference between the technologies that support that co-acting, those hygiene factors, being able to see each other, having common source of truth, having a simple method, and collaboration, and those key kinds of interactions that can really make 1 + 1 = 3. So I'm going to also talk a little bit about what can teams do to be more collaborative. And I think really on these technologies, before we get into any solutioning, because I don't think Miro is the only solution here, there's many technologies and management approaches you can take, is a couple of key points. Is one, encouraging help seeking. Why is help seeking so important? There's a great case I studied at grad school of following extreme sports orienteering courses. These were teams of like 5 people who were dropped in the wilderness, and they had to travel like over a week across hundreds of miles with like really basic maps, right? And a professor from my grad school lodged with these groups, and he made them wear like recorders on their microphone recorders on their lapels, and he analyzed all their dialogue, and he looked at the teams who got super lost. Most of them got super lost, who mistook landmarks and went in the wrong directions and had to be saved by helicopter. And he looked at the teams who made it out of the jungles. And he looked at what is the real difference here. And the two things that were really different is, one, how frequently did people ask for help? And that help was like, hey, I think that I'm looking at the map, and is that antenna over there, is that this mark? And they could validate their thinking. They could show their vulnerability that they weren't sure, and they could seek course correction. And that helped them identify a lot of challenges or blockers. And so I know from when I look at my projects, often I'm coaching my team members to ask for help more earlier. So how can you encourage help seeking? And how can you encourage the vulnerability that help seeking requires? And the second half of what this guy found, and the second half of the measure that I think is really important here, is, are people just giving information or when asked, or are they giving coaching answers? So if that person says, hey, in this case, it was, hey, is that antenna this part of the map? The person could just say no or yes, or they can say, what are you thinking? What's confusing about this for you? Let's take a look at other frame reference points and make sure that there's not further confusion. Let me guide you through why I think it's this antenna, not that antenna. So are people responding to questions in a coaching format? And I think, again, that has a lot of practical applications for our kind of work or any operational work. You could be co-acting, in those hygiene factors of people putting all the stuff in the system of record and just say, go to Confluence, right? Hey, I've got a question, guys, go to Confluence, it's answered there, right? That's one way. But are there people taking time to say, oh, interesting question. There's a standard process in Confluence, but what's confusing about this for you? Or what were you trying to do? Or what was sticky? Or do you need time to go deeper? Right? So are people going beyond to provide those more coaching-based answers rather than just transactional responses? So help seeking and coaching are two halves of this collaborative coin. And I think you can quantify them. You can look at your Slack channels, you can look at your Miro boards, and you can see the dialogues that are going on. And you can ask yourself, how much help seeking has been given? How much help seeking has been made? And that could be questions, but it could also be people formulating like tests. Hey guys, I'm thinking that X is going to be like ABC. What do you think? Is that right? It's probing, right? It's looking for feedback. It's a kind of help seeking. And you can look at how people giving transactional responses, or are they really providing coaching responses? Are they thinking about the other person as a learner, and are they trying to help them grow and learn, not just give them transactional information? And so I think there's a lot of cool stuff there's some pretty manual ways you can do that in Slack and Miro. I'm excited as we start thinking about linguistic analysis of developing key tools that can look at this, that can count questions and qualities of questions, that can count responses to those questions and the kind of statements being used to actually develop a measure for collaboration. I think that'd be super amazing. I'm going to stop for any questions. I know I just gave you a massive amount of information. Anything bubbling up for people?
Let me check. So everyone is pretty amazed by the real life presentation that you do. It's really amazing. Yeah, so people just asking if they can like join and collaborate and stuff, but nothing in particular about your presentation yet.
Okay, no worries. Let me see. So, I mean, I can go deeper into any of these things. If there's any other questions, please, please jump on in. But my real takeaway here is trying to help people see this model for as you plan collaboration in a remote context. What are your strategies to develop co-acting, these hygiene factors, and how are you using tooling to do that? And then what are you doing to build collaboration, to cultivate the real 1 + 1 = 3 elements? So how can you drive help seeking? How can you drive coaching? And really a lot of this is more traditional. So companies for a long time have invested in things like team building right? Team building as a key method. And I think we've kind of sidestepped that in the collaboration. We haven't really figured out how to make that work in a context. But we still need it. We still need teams that have all the elements of team building so we can get real collaboration. And for me, those key elements are co-creation and engagement in a common vision. So how do people feel like they're aligned with a common vision, but they're also part of shaping that common vision and that story? That's super important. How do they have the social bonds that make a team collaborative? Why social bonds? Because social bonds are really what builds trust. Trust is not a professional thing as much as it's a personal thing. Trust is about understanding and feeling accepted as a person by the humans you work with. And that's where there's a lot of good content in traditional team building, from building vulnerability, having people share about themselves, people talking about what's uncomfortable for them, some form of emotional disclosure about their weaknesses, their history, their ambitions, things that require vulnerability. Vulnerability builds trust. So the second element is really about social bonding and building trust through vulnerability. The third element is professional bonding. So understanding each other's norms and preferences and how you can work with them together. So what are each of the team members bringing to that team, and how can the team utilize their strengths and work together to address their weaknesses? And what other preferences do they have in working styles? Because if you can understand each other's working styles, then you can overcome them and work more harmoniously. And I think that's particularly useful and challenging in these more structured communication relationships we get through remote tools. And the last element is on setting up communication norms. So what are the communication norms that we want to build, how we react to things, how we communicate? Again, that's so important for remotes that's moved down to co-acting more than collaborating already. But I think there's a couple of key elements in team building that have kind of been overlooked as we've focused on co-acting. And I don't think there's great ways to do that. I'm excited if anybody has built remote teams really, really well. I think kind of trying like happy hours has not really, from my experiences, they've never really worked in a remote context. So I have had more success with doing traditional team bonding exercise and activities with the distributed team. They've had some success, but I still think it's an open question. So these are some elements for building collaboration. And hopefully, as I said, this kind of key model, which was hopefully my takeaway for people, between co-acting and collaborating is useful. And you can gauge your horizons for what's your roadmap for building co-acting and the tooling for that. And then how can you build on that for building these collaborative factors? Because if we don't, and just like my last takeaway, if we just stay at co-acting, we're never going to be as effective as companies who are co-located. Because while we're investing in making sure like our Slack hygiene is good, and we're really crazy disciplined on using Jira and documentation, they're bonding and building their teams. They're coaching each other. They're generating insights that none of the individuals had. They're ramping people much faster, and they'll be way more productive. So I think we have to play catch up really quick and get through co-acting, get through the hygiene factors much faster, and then move on to these same kinds of collaboration challenges and look for new tooling that can make addressing those collaborative factors even faster in a remote team.